3, 4.
What's changed to default?
Microphone on this. It'd be right for this, but I don't have anything else. No, we're definitely okay. We're recording fine, Sue, so that's the... And perfect. Now on Chatterbox UK, we're just lucky enough to welcome Mark Wynter. Mark, welcome. How are you?
Hello, Mark.
I'm terribly well, I'm happy to say. Thank you.
Yeah, you look well, I tell you what, you really do. Now, a bit of an all-rounder, really, Mark, I think. A great singing career, a film career, I can acting in serious shows and a bit of fun and children's television as well. So we better start at the beginning. It's always a good place, Mark. Growing up as a kid, as a child, now, was it a musical home or was it acting in plays? What came first out of all those aspects of what you do now?
It wasn't a particularly musical home. No, it wasn't. I think my musical largesse, if that's to call it, came really from my father. My parents were actually divorced when I was 2. But he, as a sideline, he always played the piano and sang in pubs for pin money, which sadly I think is one of the reasons that my mother decided to up sticks and go, because he was always coming home 3 sheets to the wind, you know. So she got a bit fed up with that. But I mean, he was a decent guy, but I never had much to do with him, quite honestly, growing up. But I think because his background was Welsh, so that's partly to do with him. My name originally as christened was Lewis, was the family name, which is pretty Welsh, isn't it? And also I think my great grandfather was an amateur Welsh opera singer on his side, and my mother, her maiden name was Riley. So, you know, with a combination of Riley and Lewis, Welsh and Irish, I think that's probably where the gene came from initially. But no, in the family, my stepfather was a Scotsman, a great guy, great hard worker, you know, a very good home provider and everything. But no, there wasn't any music really. But I was interested because as a kid at junior school, I was pulled out of assembly one day, or asked to go and see the headmaster after assembly, and I thought, oh my God, they've heard me singing along with a mate of mine alternative lyrics to the hymns, because we used to have an assembly every morning in the school hall, and it wasn't for that at all. It was to say that.
You had done that.
Well, yeah, I had, yeah, but he'd heard me singing a bit, you know, loudly above the others, and also my form teacher, who was a Welshman, actually, Mr. Rees, had said that he thought that I had a rather outstanding boy soprano voice.
Okay.
And the thrust of the headmaster sending for me was to give me a letter to take home to my mother to say that he thought I thought I should join a church choir. Okay. My mother took him at his word. She took me across the road to St. John's Church, opposite the flats where we lived, and I became a choir boy and then a lead choir boy. So I sang lots of solos and I sang things at school assemblies sometimes. And also the headmaster, who was a very kind, generous soul, Mr. Harry Gell, sadly no longer with us, but I owe him a great debt of gratitude because he paid for me for a year to have singing lessons.
Wonderful.
With a woman called Doreen Thomas in Bromley. And I remember going down to the basement to her little bed sit, which was curtained off. One half that you saw when you walked in was this baby grand piano, and then behind there, I gather, was her bed and her cooker and God knows what else, because it did smell like cooking all the time. But she was a very good teacher, and she put me in for various, in Bromley then they used to have various singing competitions and to do with the council every year, and I came out with honours on the 2 years that I entered, and from that kind of gave me an awakening to my voice, and so from the age of about 12, 13, I wanted to be a singer. Cool. It was as basic as that, really, and I sort of set about doing it in a roundabout way, although I left school at 15. I didn't do anything much in terms of singing at my second school, but which was Forest Hill Comprehensive. But I used to read the stage, and Yeah, a lot. And I used to take myself up west, as we used to say, to London. And sometimes I'd crouch down on the pavement outside the famous Two Eyes coffee bar, which had a cellar downstairs where people used to, Tom Littlewood, who ran it, used to employ people to sing, people like Tommy Steele, Cliff, all sorts, Tony Sheridan. But from where I could, my viewpoint was on the pavement, and it was like very thick double chicken wire, a little window into this basement, so I could only really see the performers from their waist down.
Okay.
but I could hear them. But I couldn't afford to go in. But I used to enjoy that and think, God, I wish that was me. And so then I started to answer a couple of ads in the stage for a singer at a couple of nightclubs in Wardour Street and places like that, which is all a bit daft, really, because I used to go along clutching a sheet music copy of Jerry Lee Lewis's Great Balls of Fire. And I was only 15, and I never got the job. I'm not surprised. I mean, you get a pianist who actually was not really up to playing that kind of music at all. It was very rum-ti-tum. So, but I persevered, and I started to, I latched onto a group on the council estate where I lived, a chap called Alan Fryer, who had a band called Hank Fryer and the Rockefellers.
Okay.
And they had a regular gig at the above the Co-op in Peckham every Saturday night. Now, you may remember a lot of these departmental stores used to have dance halls above them. Or maybe you don't, but they did. Woolworths and places like that. And so I used to go along, and I suppose I was a bit of a gopher, really. I used to help them carry in their kit, which was a lot less than it is today. I mean, the speakers were a fraction of the size that you see these days. But anyway, and then he used to take a break, Alan, who was, by the way, a coalman by day during the week, and on Saturday night he lived his dream and came on doing a lot of Elvis stuff and stuff like that, which I didn't sing particularly, although I liked Elvis. I was more interested in people like Bobby Darin. Cool. And other songs, Ricky Nelson, people like that. So I asked Alan, I said, when you take your break and go over to the pub, can I get up and sing a couple of songs with your band? And he put it to them, and they said, yeah. I said, why not? And I did, and then in July 1959, a fellow came up to me after I'd done about 2 songs. I think I sang Dream Lover and A Teenager in Love. And he came up to me afterwards and said, my name's Ray McKenda. Have you thought about being a pop singer? And I said, well, yes, I'd love to. And he said, would you like to make a private tape? And I said, well, I was a bit suspicious. I thought, where's this leading, Anyway, on those Saturday nights, we used to go off to Aldgate, to Blanche's hot dog stall. That was the big Saturday night treat. Okay. And have a couple of mugs of tea and a hamburger, and that was the big Saturday night treat for me. And this chap he tagged along with us. He came along. He got transport taxi, I think, because he didn't have a car. And I used to go on the back of the drummer's motorbike. Anyway, suddenly this guy pitched up, Ray McKenda, and then he gave me his card. He said, give me a call, and we'll see if we can set up a tape recording. So I did, and eventually, and we made a demo record, because he DJ'd in a couple of places, at Battersea Town Hall and the Civic Theatre Poplar. And also Hackney 59 Club, where Cliff Richard was the president, actually. I can't think how Cliff came to be the president, but he was the president of the club. And I think it might have been because of his religious leanings, because Father John Oates was a bit of a hip Vic. He had a Harley Davidson, about 1,000 cc's. And anyway, there used to be quite a lot of people going and guesting at the Hackney 59 Club. There was Vince Taylor, who was a rocker, Jess Conrad. Oh yes, they had a few people used to go down and just do a spot.
We spoke to him last week, actually. It's fantastic you mentioned him. Carry on, Mark. Sorry.
Did you? Yeah. Jess is a bit ubiquitous, isn't he? He's everywhere.
He was so.
Jess is always. He is. He's quite a character. Yeah, I admire him enormously. Anyway, so Ray put me into sing at these places like the Civic Theatre Poplar and Battersea Town Hall, just to do like 3 songs maybe. I remember one time at the Battersea Town Hall, he booked, because he used to do a little bit of booking for small groups. He booked, before they became big, the Shadows, who were then called the Drifters.
Yeah. So
they accompanied me on a couple of songs, and we went along like that for about 6 months, I suppose. And throughout the rest of 1959. And then he thought it was a good idea to try it. Well, he thought that he would try and organise or get me seen by a record company to get a contract. And but he didn't know how to go about it. Now, in those days, music publishers used to recruit people who were up and coming, possibly singers, and have them record one of their songs, maybe with just piano accompaniment, and then they would send them to an established artist, hoping they would record it, which is the way Matt Monro was discovered, actually.
Sure, okay.
So I don't know where Ray, who became my manager then, I was still doing a day job, and I don't know where he got the contact from, but he knew Jimmy Phillips of KPM Music. And we went along to see Jimmy Phillips, and I sang for him in virtually cold blood, just stood up there and sang. And in the back office, Jimmy Phillips had been having a conversation, a meeting with Lionel Bart.
Oh, yes, okay.
Lionel popped his head out and introduced himself.
Wow.
And as it happened, Ray had taken me to see Things They Were They Used to Be, Lionel's first musical, which was at the Garrick Theatre. And I loved it. And I thought I was really sort of moving into the swim, as it were, a little bit. And anyway, Lionel said, what's your strategy? What are you doing? Or words to that effect. And Ray said, well, we made a demo record of 5 tracks, which we had. And we sent them around to record companies, and they all rejected it. And Lionel said, well, have you been in touch with Frank Lee, who was a chief A&R man at Decca? Now, the reason he knew about Decca, Lionel, was because that was the label that the cast album of Oliver was produced from. That was the label. So anyway, he gave Ray a number, and Ray rang Frank Lee. It all seems so simple now. It wouldn't be like this now. And Ray rang Frank Lee, put forward the situation that we met Lionel, blah, blah, blah. And Frank Lee said, well, you better come up to my office and have an audition. So I went to his office on the Embankment, big Decca building, sang a couple of songs, and he offered me a contract. And it was a 1-record contract at first, but then Ray negotiated for a 2-record contract, because, of course, if you have a 1-record contract and anything goes wrong, that's it. That's your opportunity blown. And as it happened, Frank Lee said, I've got a song that's a big hit in America by a group called the Safaris Vocal Group, but I think a single artist could cover it, and I think it'd be right for your artist's voice. And that was Image of a Girl.
Yes, and quite a sizable hit, wasn't it?
Well, it was number 11. I mean,
brilliant. That's a good start for the first release, Mark, isn't it? Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, I was very lucky the way things worked out. But I mean, things were in a way much easier, of course, in those days, because Ray, he was a stockbroker. He worked at a company in Lloyd's in the city, and but he was a very personable chap, and he knew how to get through to people on the phone or just go and see them. He was very go ahead. Everything he did, more or less, in his life was successful. Sadly, no longer with us, but he was a very entrepreneurial kind of a guy. And from that, I auditioned for Harold Fielding, the impresario, for a summer season spot at his summer show in 1960. We're talking about early 1960 now. So I had like 6 months of, shall we say, grooming. Is that what you call it? In the nicest possible way,
yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Going to singing. I had some singing lessons. Ray put me in touch with and sent me to a woman called Mabel Coram, who actually had taught Craig Douglas and Dickie Valentine and Marion Ryan. It's going back a bit, but they were all very successful. And she lived in Finchley, and it was great. I went along there, and Ray paid for the lessons, well, it was extraordinary because Mabel Coram, what a lovely lady she was. I mean, she seemed quite older, much older to me then, but I suppose she was probably, I don't know, 50 or something. And of course, you must remember that I was only just 17.
Sure.
Yeah. And at the end of the lesson, bang on time, there'd be a knock on the door, and in would come her housekeeper or her assistant with a tray of tea and biscuits after the singing lesson. Now, would that happen today? I don't think so.
No.
So we'd have tea and biscuits, and then either her next pupil would arrive after about 20 minutes or so, or not. And so Mabel Coram was also instrumental in me acquiring an agent. It's like, these things follow on. One thing leads to another if you're lucky. And every year she used to put on a little concert at the Blue Angel nightclub in Berkeley Square.
Okay.
And she put forward artists that she'd been teaching, whom she thought had potential to become professional. And I was one of them. Cool. And I went along and I sang That Lucky Old Sun, another song called Just About This Time Tomorrow, which was a hit for somebody or other in America. I can't remember now. And amongst the people that she used to invite, she did invite agents and all sorts of people, was a chap called Nicholas Stevenson, who worked in, the chap who was to become my agent, worked in his office. And Nick went back and told Ian Bevan, who became my agent of Talent Artists Limited, about me. And shortly after that, Harold Fielding was having these auditions for the summer show at Bournemouth, and Ian was involved in the casting. So I went along and I sang again. I hired a guitar player who played for me, just a guitarist, and nobody else. And I sang. It was a bit daunting because halfway through my first song, and I could hear them chatting in the auditorium all the time because it was a complete darkness. Halfway through my first song, they gave me the proverbial, "Thank you, that's enough. Thank you very much. Thank you." And I protested, being so green. I said, no, I haven't finished yet, and I've got another song. They said, no, we've heard enough. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Mark.
That was like goodbye, Anyway, I came out and I was pretty cheesed off. So I rang my manager in his office in London, in the city, and told him, and he was incensed as I was that they didn't give me what he considered to be a fair shake of the dice. So he rang Ian Bevan's office and complained bitterly about the way his artist had been treated. But of course, that's par for the course. I mean, if you go on and the people taking the audition stop you and say, "Thank you very much," that's it. You've had your chance. Anyway, Ian Bevan, I subsequently learned later, first of all, the name rang a bell that Nicholas Stevenson had mentioned me, who was a trainee agent in his office, and also that he felt it was extraordinary that Ray should ring up and complain about me being shortchanged. So he said, okay, he said, we'll see him again. So I went to their offices, which is in Bruton Street off Berkeley Square, and I sang again, and they sat there just staring at me with fierce eyes, daring me to make a mistake, I think. And they let me go through 2 songs, and then they said, okay, we'll have a chat with your manager. And Ray sent me out for a wander around Bond Street for half an hour. And I think it was partly because by then I'd also acquired this recording contract. Sure. And I think on the strength of that, Ray had secured for me a spot in Harold Fielding's summer season of a show on the pier that summer, 1960, called the 2:30 Special. Okay. Which obviously was a play on the 6-5 special, the TV show. And on the bill, it was quite a list of people who were successful. Michael Cox was on it, who had a #1 at the time with Angela Jones.
Of course, yeah.
Another guy called Cuddly Dudley, who'd been on Oh Boy, the big pop TV show. Cherry Weiner, who'd also been on that TV show, along with her cousin Don Storer on drums, and also Red Price on sax, who'd also been on the Oh Boy, and also Dave Sampson and the Hunters. Remember Dave Sampson? And the Hunters. So it was quite a good poppy bill. And there was another chap on called, I think his name was Mark Anthony, and he had a minor hit about number 24, I think it was. So and Ted Rogers introduced it.
Oh wow, okay.
So it was it was great. It was an afternoon show, 2:30, finished about 4 or 4:30. There was no interval, that was about a 6 or 8 week run.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down there, did the season, and from that and the success of Image of a Girl at number 11, I was offered a tour that autumn with Jimmy Jones, Handyman, Good Timing, that guy. 2 great records, I think they were. And he was a terrific performer, wonderful. So I did that tour with Kenny Lynch and Janet Richmond and the Brook Brothers, and that was very successful for that particular time for me. And things just followed on after that, really. And that was the autumn of 1960, was my very first pop tour.
Wonderful. And did that tour actually coincide with the follow-up hit? Did that come off the back of it, maybe?
Well, I mean, because that tour was successful and what I did worked out, I was then offered other tours, and I was making other records for Decca, of course. I made some others. Dream Girl was a sort of minor hit, about 20-something. And also my entry for the Eurovision Song Competition at the time.
Yes.
Although the heats were different there. You didn't have to go to Europe. The heats were held over here. And I didn't win. I think I came 3rd or 4th. But the record did very well. In fact, in Australia, it went to number 1 and did very well, which gave me a bit of a career in Australia, actually, because in 1961, I was asked to come down from Cardiff. I was on a one-night stand tour with Billy Fury and various other people, Marty and so on, and Marty Wilde. And I came to London, auditioned for this Australian TV producer, and then I was taken to Australia for a 3-month stint on Australian television in Melbourne. And that's what gave me Dream Girl hit and a couple of others out there. And I went back to Australia to work at that channel subsequently a further 5 times.
Wow. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Well, I was very lucky. And then during my success on TV in Melbourne, I was offered a tour that autumn, actually, 1961. I went twice that year. I went in the early spring, our spring, March, April, and I came back to the summer season. Then I went back to Australia again in the autumn, about September, and I went back, and as well as doing the TV stuff, I was put on a tour with the Everly Brothers and Bobby V.
Wow. Okay.
Which I was so thrilled about, Nick, because the Everly Brothers have been my heroes. I love their musicality, their harmony. And I've been buying their records since I was 13, Bye Bye Love and so on, Wake Up Little Susie. And I was just over the moon of being on a tour with them. I couldn't believe it. So that kicked off a lot of things. Ken Brodziak was the impresario and did me a huge favor because that gave me a real lift in many ways. And so I subsequently went back and toured Australia and New Zealand with the Seekers and Cilla Black and Freddie and the Dreamers. It was an amazing time. And one was bang, bang, bang. It was one thing after another just seemed to come my way. I was very, very fortunate.
Okay, now who did you have any say, like a final yay or nay in the songs that you sang, or was it purely management and promoters that chose them and you just added your touch to them? And which way did it go?
Well, I'm sorry to say, because Ray was my manager was pretty, green and wet behind the ears with regard to the pop music industry, although he loved it. He loved the whole burgeoning of British pop taking over and becoming so big. And then once the Beatles came on board with America and so on, he loved it all. But he didn't really have any clout or any knowledge of what songs were right for me or suggestions. And my time with Decca went from 1960 only through until 1962. And because I'd had a few minor hits, as I say, Exclusively Yours, Dream Girl, Girl for Every Day, Heaven's Plan. They were minor hits. They were all in the top 50. But the Decca decided that I wasn't going to be the massive, great seller that they hoped after my first one. And so they terminated my contract. But waiting in the wings, who was a friend of my recording manager at Decca, who was actually Dick Rowe, waiting in the wings was a colleague of his who was a very much up-and-coming bright boy called Tony Hatch.
Oh, okay.
Now, Tony was the bright boy A&R man at Pi Records.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a whisper with Dick Rowe and said, I think you're recording the wrong material with Mark. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the reasons he knew about me was that I'd recorded one of his songs as a B-side when I was at Decca, a thing called Presence of Mind. Mm-hmm. A cute little song. Anyway, I went to Pi, and sure enough, my first record that I recorded under the banner of Tony Hatch's guidance was Venus in Blue Jeans.
Sure.
My favourite song.
Fantastic.
Your favourite? Oh, I'm impressed. Thank you.
And that did rather well. Number four, I believe, in the UK. And
I think it was number 4, yeah.
Sue's actually got a question. Sue?
Yeah, I've got a question regarding Venus in Blue Jeans. Is there a story behind the song at all?
Not to my knowledge. It was written by Howie Greenfield, wasn't it? And Jerry Keller, I think, was the other co-writer who recorded Here Comes Summer. No, I don't know if there was a story at all, other than that, from my point of view, it was offered to me. I was doing, again, I was working down on the South Coast, the Wynter Gardens, and Tony said, soon after he signed me, he said, I've got this great song. I want you to come to London tomorrow. I didn't have much time. So I went on the milk train, as they used to have in those days.
Yes.
Yeah, got to London, went to Pi Studios, was given the music, ran through it a few times with Tony, and that was it, really. And then I went back on for another session to record a B-side and a couple of other tracks. Because in those days, you had a recording session of about 3 hours normally, and during that time, you'd normally record 4 tracks. You know, I never understand it these days when people say, I've been working on my last single for 9 months. I think, well, what? You know, but then, of course, you know, all this overlaying of things and all kinds of things that are done today, the technicality of it is so different to how it used to. It was so basic, you know, you'd have a minimum number of microphones, and I loved it, Nick. It was so exciting. You walk in the studio and there'd be a whole gang of musicians there, you know, vocal backing singers, everybody would be there. In the last things I've done, once I moved into other areas of musicals and so on, quite often you go in, it would only be the rhythm section, and they'd add everything afterwards.
Sure, yeah.
Which completely negates any atmosphere. You know, there was no atmosphere. But those days were great. In fact, I suppose really my most exciting, wonderful moment that I can recall to this day, and I can see it in my mind's eye, was the very first time I walked into a recording studio, which was Decca Recording Studios off West End Lane in London. And they were all there, everybody. I mean, I didn't know anybody at all, didn't know a soul. And just being able to record and hear myself back on the speakers, you know, the playback in the recording box upstairs where the engineers were, that was so exciting. Because I had no idea then that, you know, it was going to be a hit, because it's all very much a lottery, you know, isn't it? What you have a hit or not? I mean, the public either take to the record or they don't, you know, depending on, you might get a lot of marketing, but sometimes even marketing doesn't do it, because I've had lots of records out during my time with Pi that had very good reviews, excellent reviews, in fact, in some cases, and they weren't hits. But, you know, that's the luck of the draw. It's a gamble. It's an unknown, exciting sort of area, really.
Well, my favourite song of yours, Mark, is actually, excuse me, please, is It's Almost Tomorrow. And to me, it's the finest version of all the different versions I've heard. And of course, Dreamweaver's had it, and it's been done by a few people. And I must say, that's my favourite of yours. And I do feel that's the best version there's ever been of it as well. Brilliant.
Well, that's kind of to say so. And there is a bit of a story to that, because in actual fact, what happened with It's Almost Tomorrow was, Tony said to me, I think we've got to get another record out. He called me into the office and he said, we've got to get another record out. It's been a while since the last record. And of course, I'd had a couple of misses. After Venus, I recorded a song called Aladdin's Lamp, which was was a mistake, actually, because it sounds like a song from a child's song from a panto. So, you know, I mean, I'm not saying those things might not be successful, but it was wrong for me at the time after Venus. But fortunately, after that, Go Away Little Girl came along. But It's Almost Tomorrow came up because Tony asked me if I had any ideas of what I might like to record. That was the only time he ever asked me that. And I remembered the Dreamweavers version from when I was a kid, because we didn't have a TV. We listened to the radio all the time. And that song kind of stuck with me. It was the original by them was in a 3/4 tempo. So Tony got hold of the music, and I went to his office again, and he said, look, I've been playing around with this song. He said, we wouldn't do it. He said, it's a good idea. It would suit you. He said, but not the way it was done originally. He said, I put it in a 4/4 kind of country feel. He said, because I heard a track that you recorded at Decca of Jealous Heart, which was a country song. He said, and I think it suits your voice very well. So that's how It's Almost Tomorrow came about.
Sure, and it's also sort of that time that you were going around. I mean, obviously, you were heading concerts and tours as well. But you're remembered in my hometown because we've got some great Facebook pages to do with Hastings. And you supported Cliff Richard at the old ABC Cinema here, 2,000 seater. So many people talk about when you actually played in Hastings. So you're very well remembered here. Put it that way.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, listen, one of the great things about this game, this profession, is if you're lucky enough to travel, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I've said it to my children, travel is the most marvelous thing. And if you're offered the chance to travel in the course of your job, and of course, again, I hate to say this, but things were much easier then. You could just pitch up the airport an hour before and get on the plane. Nowadays, you've got to get there half a day before to hang around for God knows what before you can get on. But it was marvellous. And being able to travel the length and breadth of Great Britain, all over the place, through the United Kingdom, as well as travelling abroad, on the continent working, because there's no doubt about it, a hit record is the quickest and best way for an artist to be known throughout the world. If it takes off in other countries, there's no doubt about it. It is. It's the surest way. It's a passport to recognition, and I had that passport, and it was, it was incredible. I was so lucky, and equally so, the hit record is the thing. My hits, I had 9 altogether, some bigger than others, of course, but that they were stepping stones to what I went on to do apart from making records. Although I must say I miss making records. It's a great thing. I loved being in the studio, as I say, with all those musicians and making records. But equally so, I've loved, in a different way, being in musicals. Musicals more than plays. Plays is a bit terribly serioso and theatrical, but musicals is great because you hear the overture when you're getting ready in the dressing room, and it's a lot more. It's more uplifting, really. When you're in a play, and I've been in some really serious plays, much as I've enjoyed them, and it's wonderful when they've worked out. Which I'm happy to say that they have, all except for one, which was a disastrous tour of something called Under the Gooseberry Bush, which wasn't a serious play. It was meant to be a farce. Well, it was a farce because it was dreadful. Anyway, I mean, that's what you got to accept. And of course, it's a tough old business in many ways because it's a lot of it is a bit, especially as you move out of the record scene. And then I thought that once I'd moved into the theatre and did my first play in London, Conduct Unbecoming, in 1970. I rather felt by then that I was going to be included in considerations for lots of other things of that kind. But how wrong I was! I mean, I did audition for lots of things, didn't get any of them, and then I found that I was actually finding it difficult to get arrested even, and so I went away and did lots of repertory theatre to try and learn a bit more about what I was supposed to be doing. Because there's no doubt about it. There's no such thing as an overnight success.
Okay.
Not at all. I mean, you experience and knowledge and people that have seen you. To be seen is very important. So the problem is that if you're out of work for a long time as an actor, nobody sees you. So A, you can't practice your craft, and secondly, nobody can see you to consider you for something else. So it's it's a tricky one. You know.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you ended up on television in the 70s, but before we do that, let's talk briefly about films. And I'm very pleased to say the British Film Institute have helped me out with audio from two movies you actually starred in as Mark and yourself, Just for Fun and Just for You. And you headed some very, very famous people there, but you were the credited star of those two movies. How brilliant was that, you know?
Well, Just for Fun came about because the year before, the producer Milton Subotsky had a big success with a film called It's Trad Dad, that a lot of pop people were in. I think Helen Shapiro was in it. I think Craig Douglas was in it. So it was a follow-up, really. But the interesting thing about Just for Fun was that the premise was that it was a bunch of teenagers who were aspiring to have the vote for the legal age to vote reduced. And of course, that came to be eventually in a few years' time through the pressure and the campaigning by a chap called Screaming Lord Sutch.
Oh, yes.
Remember him?
Yes.
Yeah. Dave. His real name was Dave. Now, he very much with his party was called, what was it? The Monster Raving Loony Party. What a great name. And I worked with him on stage when I was on a tour. And his first appearance was coming out of a coffin, which is hilarious. But he was quite a character. He used to run around like a caveman with a big club in a leopard skin. But aside from that, his idea about lowering the age for teenagers to vote was a very good one, and it did come to pass. But at that time, it was just an idea for a film.
Sure.
So I was the chap with the leading role, kind of inspiring everybody and getting a lot of people on board, and a lot of pop people in it, as you know. And yeah, it was very successful. And then from that, I was offered the other thing, just for you, yes, for you, which was it was a small part though. It wasn't very much actually, until I didn't make another film until 1968. When I was offered a decent part in a horror film, called The Haunted House of Horror. But there you are. That's the way it goes.
And also in the 70s, Red, and also you had a little appearance in Superman the movie, the first Superman film. So wow, it's pretty good, you know. Yeah. It looks good on TV.
Just a truck driver. Red was an interesting little film. It was a short film, about 40 minutes, I think, made by a German, I think she was German or Prussian, director called Astrid Frank.
Okay.
Who had some very, very good ideas. It was a strange little film, actually, a bit surreal, but it had some good people in it. Ferdy Mayne was a very successful continental actor. And
can I just say, could we just have a 10-second break? Nick's got asthma, and all I can hear on the recordings is breathing. So can we just have a 10-second break so he can take his inhaler?
Yeah, sure.
I do apologise, Mark, but that's all good. Thank you. I sort of like my breathing was getting more and more heavy. And it was I didn't want it to carry on. Oh, sorry, Mike. I think you were talking about Red then, weren't you?
Am I rabbiting on a bit?
No, not at all. Not at all. You were talking about Red. No, I just needed that. My breathing was getting more and more worse. Sorry about that.
Yeah, my brother used it, and my sister used one of those.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about the director in Red.
Red, well, yeah, Astrid Frank. Ferdy Mayne was in it. He was marvellous as a sort of a strange kind of wandering gypsy type of guy, really. And I was a kind of a troubadour. And Gabrielle Drake was in it, Nick Drake's sister.
Yes. Was in Crossroads for many years.
Yeah. She was my paramour, as it were. But it was a strange kind of surreal film, but it was quite successful. And I didn't know it had been released. Actually, and I went down to Bournemouth and I rented a flat from a Miles performer who you may recall, Dickie Henderson.
Yes, indeed.
He had a flat down in Bournemouth, and I was learning the role of a play I was about to do, and I wanted to go somewhere quiet to really cut off. And I went down there, and I went to the cinema in Bournemouth to see a Peter O'Toole film called, I think it was called The Happiest Days of My Life or something like that. Anyway, it was marvellous. It was a send-up of a bit of a crazy actor, but he was terrific. And there was a short on with it, and it was Red. And I had no idea. So I was sitting there, and then this short came up, and I thought, oh, my God, that's that film I made about a year ago. Yeah, and but funnily enough, we've never been able to trace it.
Okay.
Never, even through the IMBD, whatever the film library is, we've never been able to trace it, because I'd love to get a copy of it. But anyway,
sure.
So yeah, there was that. And then the truck driver in Superman. So yeah,
great.
I mean,
I love those little bits. But of course, also that sort of period of Superman, you were also appearing on, I guess it was paying the mortgage or the rent or whatever, but you were, I think it was Granada Television, and it was a kiddies thing. Once upon you were sort of like, the studio was made out to look like a forest, and you were in a clearing in it, and you read a story to the kids. And was it Once Upon a Time? What was that one called? I remember it being on.
Well, there were two series actually.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The first one was Once Upon a Time,
mm-hmm.
which proved to be very successful. And then the director, lovely woman, Pat Baker, said, "Mark, we'd like to do another series with you, but we want to change things a little bit." She said, "Have you got any ideas?" I said, "Well, what about having some musicians to represent some of the animals and creatures I talk about in the stories, as well as me doing their voices myself, like a frog or whatever, you know." And she said, "That's a good idea." So they booked 3 musicians, and that became Sounds Like a Story from Once Upon a Time. Sounds Like a Story.
Was this
and that was also very successful, and that it was repeated actually. I think in 1981 they repeated it. They did for about 2 years. It was a lunchtime thing on a Friday. Yeah, sure. I enjoyed doing that very much.
What's the latter one? I've got this vision where, because I only ever saw a couple of them when I was sort of I was nearing leaving school age then, but I don't know if it was during O levels or whatever. I caught 1 or 2 of them, and I seem to remember you were singing. One of them, you sang a song at the end. I take it's the latter one. Is that right?
The latter one, that's right. Cool. Because there was a group on called the Black Theatre of Prague.
Mm-hmm.
When I say group, it wasn't a group, it was 2 people, a man and a woman, and they worked they called the Black Theatre of Prague because they worked in black velvet.
Mm-hmm.
So you could only see the puppets, you couldn't see them operating the puppets. And whatever the little story was, which took up a few minutes in the programme, whatever that little story was, Pat Baker asked me if I'd like to come up with a little song to accompany it.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and I sat and wrote down these little, a few minutes of just a couple of minutes of a ditty of some kind to explain the story of what these puppets were doing. Yeah, it worked out very well.
Fantastic. I'm going to get you up to the present day and what you're doing in just a moment, but I do have a couple of questions. I'll put them to you anyway. One is from Sheila Cox in Tunbridge Wells, and she says, she's just an inquiry. She said, when Mark first started, could you ask him, did he ever go to the Red Lion pub at Sparrows Green Waters, because somebody was in the bar one night, looked just like him, and she said she was too nervous to ask. So she thought she'd wait 60 years and get me to ask you.
The Red Lion pub where?
In Sparrows Green at Wadhurst. This lady just wanted to know, were you there about 60 years ago drinking with some friends? Because if so, you answer her question. She could have sworn it was you, and there's apparently 10 shillings on this with a friend.
Oh, I'm sorry to say, although I've been in lots of pubs in my time, I don't remember going to that pub. I don't. No, I don't think so.
Thank you for answering that, Mark. It looks like she's lost 10 shillings then.
No, I'm sorry about that.
Mark, also got a question. It's like a double ender. In fact, you've answered half of it already. And this comes from Gus McCormack of Dundee. And he says, firstly, can I thank you kindly for signing his copy of the 2017 triple set of Venus and Blue Jeans, which Gus thinks is the most comprehensive collection of your recorded material, and it's all excellent. So that's a compliment. But
yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's 95 tracks on there. Yeah.
Wow, Mark, that's amazing. But what Gus has asked is if you could pick, this is hard, especially we've got 95 on that alone. If you could have picked one song to have recorded and released when you were starting out as a singer, what would it have been?
If I'd have picked just one song,
yeah. What would it have
one
been?
that I've recorded or wanted to record?
I've got a feeling I'm reading it as though wanted to record. That's what I'm thinking.
Probably Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Oh,
Brilliant song.
Yes, okay. I'd like to hear your touch on that, to be honest with you. That sounds good.
I used to sing it in my act on stage.
Oh, wonderful.
And I love Simon and Garfunkel. I think he's written some incredible songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most beautiful record. And I think the song says a lot.
Sure.
And I played a lot, and then I started to sing it in my act. And it was always very well received. So if I had the chance to have recorded that, I think I'd like to have put that down.
That's nice. And as a singer, who were your musical influences? Well, you basically, I believe you mentioned the Everly Brothers and Bobby Darin. So I've just got something to add to it. I think you basically told us in advance of that question, I think, really.
Well, I think one of my earlier influences when I was much younger, before the age of 12, as I said, because we didn't have a TV, only a radio, and I used to love Guy Mitchell's records.
Okay, yes, yeah, cool.
Some of them were a bit gimmicky, weren't they? There's a pawn shop on the corner, and of course, Singing the Blues, which was covered over here by Tommy Steele.
Yeah.
Knee Deep in the Blues. But I used to sing a medley of Guy Mitchell's songs at one point in my cabaret act, and My Heart Cries for You. He made some great records, I think. But he was kind of pop kind of hillbilly country, wasn't he? Really?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think that's probably quite an accurate description, really.
I mean, in the early 1950s, it's extraordinary to think that he and Johnny Ray were the two biggest record sellers in the world. Even Frank Sinatra, who didn't have a contract at that point, wasn't selling any records. But Guy Mitchell and Johnny Ray were massive on both on Philips' label.
Sure.
Well, they were huge. It makes you wonder how these people felt when it all kind of ended. Because if you didn't move on to something else, which I was lucky enough to do, going into musicals and plays and things and TV stuff, what the hell do you do? I mean, it must be. I mean, Johnny Ray, he stopped the traffic at Oxford Circus. They had to block off the roads when he came over here to play the Palladium.
Wow!
And it was massive, absolutely huge. But I know, sadly, his life ended with illness. I think that if he had whatever it was, cirrhosis of the liver or something like that. But it was a sad ending. But he was a massive star and a great performer. I saw him perform at the Silver Spade Room at the Chevron Hotel in Sydney, in Australia. And he was a great, but in fact, somebody told me once that if I think about his movement on stage as I saw, I gather that Elvis, who came along a few years later, because we're talking about 1952 now, Elvis came along a little bit later, I gather that Elvis had actually aped some of Johnny Ray's original physical gestures. The difference was that Johnny Ray worked in a tuxedo because that was the thing in those days. And of course, Elvis didn't. Elvis was much more relaxed, and because he had an incredible voice and had everything else going for him. But I gather that some of his actual stage initial movement before he went on to the karate stuff was influenced by Johnny Ray.
Cool. Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. Now, Mark, we need to get you to the present day. Now, from the 80s into the 90s, noughties, and where we are now, has it been mostly acting in plays, or has it been touring, or has it been more or less 50-50 to carry you through to where we are now?
Well, surprisingly enough, although people mostly remember me for being a singer, because that's often the case. The first thing that you're lucky enough to be successful with is the mould that people remember you by. But I've actually worked in the theatre, in musicals and plays, a lot longer than I have as a singer. In fact, when I did the tour with Marty Wilde and Eden Kane and Mike Berry and the Wildcats back in 2016, that was the first pop tour I'd been on since 1964, when I was on tour with Dave Clark.
Wow.
And that's a big gap.
Yeah.
And that came about because I went to see Marty in a show. I knew Marty from way back, of course. I went to see him in a show not far from where I live, and I loved it. And I went backstage to see him. And the impresario, Derek Nichol, was there. And he said, "Oh, Mark," he said, "Well, great to see you." He said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, this very moment, nothing." I said, "I'm doing a tour of a play later on for about 6 months later this year." And he said, "Oh, okay." He said, "You fancy doing one of these pop tours?" I said, "Well, yeah, why not?" So it's a long time since I did one, and it was 1964, and here we are. That was about 2015, I think, when I went to see Marty in that show. Anyway, the following year, in the autumn, it came about that I was on the tour with them all, and that was a huge success. Bigger than my wildest expectations, really. And we did it again in 2017, and again it was a real wow. And it was mooted to go again. I couldn't do it in 2018 because I was abroad working in a play. And then in 2019, it was due to go on, but of course it's since been cancelled 3 times. 3 times. It's due now to go on in the spring of 2022, next year.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. Sounds amazing.
It's due to kick off on April the 21st at Llandudno, and there's 20 odd dates, and it finishes on May the 22nd in Blackpool, and it's with Marty's daughters on the bill as well.
Oh, Roxanne, yes.
Roxanne. So so it's looking good at the moment. The theatres are all booked, and bookings are all happening big time, I gather. So
fantastic. Well, what we do, we have a little update, and when it's about to kick off, then we'll get you on, and I'll just reel off all the dates at the end, so you'll get a fair whack then, because you'll find that a lot of those concerts will be in towns where we're on radio stations, because we're on an awful lot.
Excellent.
Right, what's happening in the short term? I mean, with you work-wise, is there a play coming up or some concerts? Say into the autumn. Have we got anything lined up, Mark?
No, there's nothing in the autumn. I might be going to South Africa at Christmas in a version of My Fair Lady, which was cancelled from 2 Christmases ago, and they're looking to remount it this coming Christmas. But at the moment, everyone's still very cautious about theatre life at the moment. I mean, there are things opening up in London. I only know of one tour that's due to go on in August. That's a resumption of one that was cancelled from March 2020. I think there's still quite a lot of caution about people, and also about people sitting next to each other. Which, mind you, if you watch the final of the football last night, you wouldn't credit it, would you? I mean, people were practically on each other's shoulders, practically.
Indeed.
So, and also the tennis. I mean, people are not social distancing there, and I don't believe they've checked every single person that went in. They'd be there all day.
Absolutely.
So. And I don't think they can do that with provincial theatre. It would take so long to get people in and out. And also, would it be viable, which I think not, to have social distancing on a one-night stand tour? I don't think it would. I think, unless they decide to do it, and, I mean, it might work out for some theatres. I know some of the big boys, Andrew Lloyd Webber and people like that, are remounting Phantom. But they're having to change the staging, so people aren't close to each other. So it's still very much a bit of a testing ground, although I went to see a show on Saturday in Brighton of somebody I've worked with in London and other places called Rosie Ash, who's doing a one-woman show on Dora Bryan. Remember Dora Bryan?
Yes, I do. I love that.
Lovely Dora Bryan. She was terrific. I worked with her a lot, lots of things, plays and also musicals and also pantomime. And the Rosie Ash is doing this great show. It was about an hour and a quarter long. It was just a one-woman show, and it was absolutely wonderful. Now, we were all socially distanced. So I suppose it was about half a house, really, for the size of the auditorium.
Right.
But, it was so good. I mean, it's a standing ovation, and it was a great show. And if that's the way it's going to go, then maybe that's the way it's going to go.
Sure. No, absolutely. Sue's got one more question, Mark.
Mark, is there any plans in the future or now to do an autobiography?
That's been mooted to me so many times, Sue.
Amazing.
I mean, I'm very lucky. I've had a very full, successful life. I mean, I can't believe it that last year was 60 glorious years.
Well,
last year. I can't believe it that,
congratulations.
60 years.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's 61 years this year, although, of course, this last year, none of us have worked, we haven't been able to. I've thought about it, but the only trouble is with an autobiography, I think, is if you tell everything warts and all, it could come out as being unkind to some people because, like in all businesses, I know where the bodies are buried.
Sure.
And I don't think I'm a bit mistrustful of some autobiographies because I don't think they are 100% open about everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the best ones really have been where people talk a lot more about their growing up in their private life, such as I believe Paul O'Grady's autobiography. I believe was marvelous. In fact, I must read it. But a lot of the others to do with the business. I'm a bit suspect of some of them, although one of the best autobiographies I've ever read was the one by Michael Caine.
Okay.
And I thought his first autobiography was brilliant. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he wrote it by hand. It was just him. It wasn't ghosted. And I thought it was absolutely terrific. But it was interesting because it was about his private life as well, growing up, as what was his name?
Morris White. Yeah.
Morris Micklewhite, I think. But some of the others I'm a little bit suspect about.
Mm-hmm.
So whether I will or not, I don't know. I mean, what would I call it? I don't know. The Days of Sign and Poses. How's that?
Very good. Mark, let's have a look before we wrap up. I've done a little bit of research here. I found a Facebook page called Mark Wynter Official, Wynter being Wynter. So hopefully people, I've just gone along and liked it. So hopefully people listening will like that as well. So Mark Wynter Official. And most importantly, Mark, we must give this a plug, is your amazing website. And it is very, very good. markwinter.com. So people listening may want to, or hopefully will have a look. markwinter.com. And, well, it's just a massive biography, news, what you've done. You can buy merchandise and et cetera, et cetera. So do please take a look at markwinter.com. And yes, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you at last. And thank you for coming on Chatterbox UK. Hopefully we will chat again.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Sue. Look
Thank
after
you.
yourselves.
And you.
And you
Take care.